Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have a fellow Adrian, no less. I have Adrian McDermo, who is the president of products at Zendesk. Hi, Adrian. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Adrian. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm just going for the record. I'm just going to say that sounds weird. It's like an echo chamber, right? But so, Adrian, we've spoken before, but it was a couple of years ago for a piece I was writing about some kind of other kind of like research, which, but now we're going to, this is the subject of the podcast. But before we get into all of that, for the benefit of our listeners and our readers, can you explain to me a little bit about kind of yourself and also about the work that you do?
Sure, yeah. So at Zendesk, which is a customer service software company, I run the product engineering and product strategy groups. Mm-hmm. And we build software to help companies be the company that their customers want them to be. You know, we're all about building simple, easy, great customer experiences and powering that with the tool set that we build. Mm-hmm. I've been there maybe 10 years. It was a Danish startup that moved to San Francisco, and I joined not too long after that. And we've, grown that team to 1,200 people from 12. Mm-hmm. So it's been a great journey. Mm-hmm. Myself, I have a computer science background from Leicester Polytechnic, and I'm a Yorkshireman and lifelong Leeds United supporter living in San Francisco.
Wow. Perfect. I mean, I feel like going Leeds kind of now, given that you're now back in the Premier League. But I also kind of like know that Mikael Svenum is a friend of the podcast. I remember speaking to him, it must be 7 or 8 years ago on this, because this thing has been going kind of for a long time. When he was visiting London, and before they'd actually moved to San Francisco, so that was some time ago.
Yeah, it would have been a while ago. So 2009 probably.
Bronze, because this has been going since. This podcast in various forms has been going continuously since January 2011, and so I can honestly say I've been podcasting since before it was cool, and apparently now it's cool, and I'll probably still be podcasting when it's no longer cool, such as my want. But anyway, that's not why we're here. We're here because we want to talk about some of the new research that you published recently in cooperation with ESG Research that looked at sort of what it means to be a customer service and support champion. So can you tell me a bit about it and kind of how and why it came about?
Yeah, so we partnered with this analyst firm, the Enterprise Strategy Group, and we had a bunch of different goals, but one of them was to generate some quantifiable evidence that we could point to, which says, something that we all, I think, inherently believe, which is if you invest in great customer service, your business will grow faster. Right. And be more successful. Mm-hmm. We also wanted to kind of figure out, in the light of COVID-19, what are the hallmarks of growth and success kind of in unpredictable times, and what's making some organizations adapt better than others? What is making, overall some organizations kind of customer service champions that improve their processes continuously and keep on giving better customer experiences? And what are the things that companies that aren't quite there yet, what are the things that they can do to sort of up their profile, improve their game?
Okay. Yeah, because I see that the kind of model, the research rather, sets out a model that, as you say, segments these respondents, and I think you picked out sort of three levels of service and support maturity. Now you alluded to one, which is those kind of champions, but there's the other ones. The other ones are risers and starter organizations, if that's right. I mean, can you give me a bit of a description about each of these levels and sort of what are sort of some of the main characteristics of each kind of level, just to kind of paint that picture about the, I guess, the three different buckets that people fall into?
Yeah, from a we sort of we surveyed a whole bunch of different questions, then we picked out key characteristics that certain classes of company would cluster around, right? So the starters of those 7 characteristics that we thought were chief indicators, they had 3 or fewer. Starters account for about 48% of the UK and EU markets.
Mm-hmm.
Risers are in the middle, they have 4 or 5 of the best practices in place. And risers are sort of getting there. They've evolved their business processes, but that they account for about 37% of the EU market in UK. And then champions are at kind of 6 or 7 of the 7, right? They have the tools in place, the training, they have top-down management support. They're on top of their metrics. And based on our research, champions account for about the top 15% of the UK and European market.
Right. I mean, so you said it's like 7 different characteristics. I mean, can you give a bit of a quick rundown of what those kind of like 7 kind of are? I mean, just like that, the headlines, because then we can point people to the research, because there's a lot in there. I know I've seen the research.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first thing is that there's a sort of a top-down commitment to customer experience, right? Champions kind of as organizations, as companies, they agree that an investment in CX is an investment in growth in the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of involvement from senior business leaders, right? Something like, we see that involvement in sort of 33% of larger mid-sized enterprise, a lot more in small businesses, 42%, but any investment into small businesses is a significant investment. So I think that kind of makes sense. Second is that they tend to have a focus on their people, having enough people, giving them enough training. Champions average 2.5 more days of training per year than starters.
Right.
And there's probably some knowledge processes that go along with that, where they're capturing knowledge and reusing it. Which brings us sort of the third characteristic, which is they tend to be data driven. They have KPIs, they have metrics, they measure them, they look at them every day, and they focus on them. And they know, they can quantify this is good and this is bad. We are improving or we are getting worse, right? And they can state their KPIs clearly. Fourth is really the tool set. Are they using automation and AI, which are, to a certain extent, are becoming critical to sort of maintain responsiveness, to have the throughput that you need for CX and to kind of build for that. And then fifth is that they're, might sound obvious, but they're actually investing for CX success, right? We see sort of almost 60% of champions expecting to spend more on customer experience tools and technology, and see that increasing versus, a far smaller percentage of the risers or the starters. And so, the idea that it's a priority for the company, it's a priority to have the right people and have enough people. It's a priority to, measure your outcomes and know what you're trying to do, to have the right tools and to have the right technologies and to be investing for that. You put all those things together and you see that you get these repeatable outcomes for great customer experience, good CSAT, and that in turn leads to businesses that grow and expand.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So, and that's that's all the kind of that's what is it, 7 different characteristics? Is that right?
Yeah. So the characteristics are spread across those kind of 5 areas, and there are 7 characteristics that we use for this segmentation: starter, riser, and champion.
And so, I guess, I mean, because this is all about kind of like it's like a maturity kind of model in many kind of like ways. But I mean, what are the things that you're seeing from the research? I mean, across, because I know the research was it North American and European and drills down into a different kind of country, different country levels, in particular in the European sort of space. I mean, what are you over? What are the overarching characteristics of champions in terms of what they do and what they're focusing on that's driving their success? Is it this kind of continuous improvement, or is it investment, or is it the top-down support, or kind of what is the big things?
I think I do think just because to be in the champion category, you basically have to be hitting 6 or 7 of those characteristics, right?
Right.
So yes, you can have you can have it be a top-down priority, but if you're under investing, you're not going to get, you're not going to drive improvement, and you're not going to drive growth and experience.
Right.
Ultimately looking to raise your NPS, to get word of mouth from your customers, to be a company that people want to do business with, right? That meets the basic expectations. Same thing if your technology lags, same thing, and then I think we both know that if you don't set metric driven goals and KPIs, you're kind of not going to have the right path towards improvement. You're not actually going to know if you're getting better.
Yeah.
And then without the people and without the training for the people and the tools for the people, again, you're going to lag. So it's interesting to me that, and I think the research was pretty clear when we sort of did the cluster analysis and regressions, right? That you kind of needed to be hitting 6 of the 7 at least to be in the champion category and see those outcomes and see that level of improvement.
Right.
Differentiation, comes in different places in terms of the size of the company and the market you're in and the characteristics and size of business. But ultimately, the champions are pretty consistently investing more. They're pretty consistently training more. They pretty consistently have top-down metrics.
And so it's not like that anybody who's in the riser category are deficient on one or two sort of characteristics, and that's what's holding them back. I mean, that picture, it feels to me, is quite mixed in many ways, and therefore it's not just like, oh, here's the obvious thing, do more of this and you'll go from here to here, as it were.
Yeah, there are risers who have a top-down approach but are underinvesting. Risers
right.
who do almost everything, but then they don't have enough humans working on the problem, and the humans they have aren't well trained.
Right. Okay. And how does that work? Because I know you alluded to different sizes of organizations, because I know you've done different versions of the research, one for kind of mid-market and enterprise organizations and another one for smaller businesses. I mean, did you see any differences in the characteristics across the size of business, or in terms of the shape of the champions and risers and starters, or was it quite a consistent kind of picture?
Yeah, not 100% surprisingly. There given the investment that's needed and sort of the organizational maturity that's needed, you see a higher percentage of mid-sized and enterprise businesses as champions. It's like 29%. Right. That figure drops to 22% for small businesses, and nearly half of small businesses are still in the starter phase.
Right. Okay. And is the differences, or are there rather differences like across regions? Because I know you've done kind of different kind of like regions, whether it's kind of Latin America or kind of North America, kind of Europe and stuff. I mean, are we seeing different maturity levels across kind of like regions as well? Because I know that that's kind of one of the thing that's has become obvious to me, is that different people in different places have a different definition of what good looks like, and a different grasp of kind of like what good looks like as well.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I get to speak to Zendesk customers in a whole bunch of different countries, and some of the heads of CX in various countries are like, yeah, we haven't really learned to appreciate customer experience as an important thing yet, and you hear that all over the world, right?
Yes.
But from a variation point of view, if we just look at champions, right? We said that, Europe was like 15%, North America is 27%. That is a significant difference, right? LATAM 21, APAC also 27%. So huge variation there in terms of kind of champion population. The greatest proportion of starters in LATAM are 46. So there's sort of you either at the beginning or you're at the end. There are not too many people in the middle, right? There's not too much.
There was no kind of bell curve. It was like a flip bell curve in many ways.
Yeah, it's a flip bell curve for LATAM. So big variation. Within Europe, France seems to be further along in terms of CX maturity, with 21% of French companies actually identified as champions versus 16 in the UK and only 8% in Germany.
Right.
But champions in the UK are significantly more responsive to their customers. Like there are things that they are much better at. They have their first response rate in under an hour is probably almost 3 times that of the rest of the world,
Mm.
right? And I was trying to, I don't really have a great narrative for that. I wonder what you think, right? Like, is that because um, there's less sort of, there's a closeness in terms of geography in Europe that leads to certain responses, or there's less outsourcing and time shifting? I don't know. It's
Well,
a different expectation thing.
yeah, no, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I remember kind of before um, we went before the pandemic hit, I was playing around with a sort of a new kind of research come sort of potential book idea, and it was going to explore a thing called the working title, which I was kind of becoming quite fond of, which was the cartography of service. And it was this idea that service as a word and as a thing can mean different things to different people in different countries. And I think that's might be kind of how it might go somewhere towards explaining some of those differences.
Mm.
But I thought it was an interesting thing, and in terms of what people kind of come to expect and from their own kind of almost local kind of national kind of level, but then also then how that kind of it gets influenced by other things kind of like more globally, as it were. And I thought it was a fascinating kind of like kind of thing but I never got it started because then the pandemic kind of like hit, and I just thought, well, actually taking the temperature on that when the tectonic plates of the world is kind of shifting might be kind of like a fool's errand.
Yeah, I had this worldview that the future of customer service was here. It was just unevenly distributed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It began in digital company land, and everyone else would catch up eventually. And I sort of had, I think I was speaking at an event in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and a little bit I kind of had my clock cleaned by the way that the local team was like, yeah, I don't know that that's really true, mate. I think that you have an idea of what digital service is, but we like connections here. We like to talk to people. And then similarly, the way that people think about it in Tokyo,
Yeah.
and culturally want to manage a service conversation is very, very different in terms of there's an expectation of apology,
Yes.
and everything else. And then, post pandemic, what has been interesting for us is we've seen a difference. We one of the questions we were asking, one of the lines of inquiry was around how was it pivoting to remote work during shelter in place and other things, right? And Europeans, despite the paucity of champions, Europeans were significantly better at the pivot, and said it was very smooth. 60% versus 40% in North America.
Right.
Um, you know, Again, that could be because often they're serving many countries and they're already a little bit quote unquote remote in that way.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, it's definitely something I think it's definitely something I'm going to revisit, because you're absolutely kind of right. I think different people we make assumptions about what good service and good experience looks like, and it's easy to do it from our own perspective. But as you say, there can be a lot of clock cleaning kind of gets done kind of when you go and share that with different sort of people, because actually what becomes apparent when on closer inspection is that actually the differences are the things that kind of that really matter and really stand out. So that's fascinating. But if you think about it from a maturity sort of curve, and the thing about that there's many of these businesses that are still in sort of starter kind of mode. Because the thing that's kind of been that struck me over the last kind of few months is that there's this collapsing of the gap between what is kind of rhetoric and actual real activity. And do you think that's kind of possibly one of the keys to getting people moving from out of the starter kind of position and into the kind of the riser and on the route towards becoming champions? Is that people need to stop paying excessive lip service and actually just start doing more real work? around this? Is that the difference, or is there more? Is there other things they should be doing? Is it just or like just investing more, for example?
I think there is I tend to have a sort of pedestrian bias for action personally anyway. But I do think that, not to pander to the title of the podcast, but there is sort of a punk element to this where it's like, yeah, you just need to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, we have to think about, when you're thinking about it a little bit, you have to think about change management, right?
Right.
I think about change the way that Hemingway spoke about bankruptcy, right? Change comes slowly and then all at once. And the
Yes.
pandemic made change come all at once,
Yes.
right? And so if you were sitting on some significant digital transformation project for your organization that had a 5-year roadmap, like some Maoist plan for the production of grain, you have had you've had your clock cleaned, you've had your world disrupted, and you need to jettison so much of the governance project iterative sort of motion that you've been going through. Not that those things don't have value, but one of the metrics we talk about at Zendesk that I have a passion for, and we project out to our customers, is what we're proud of in the software that we sell, which is what we build for in the software that we sell, is time to first ticket served. That is, I can hand you this product and you can start serving tickets and having chats and having contact with customers as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And I think it's that sort of DIY, get to it as quickly as possible attitude that people have had to adopt, right? We have 160,000 customers, and I try and talk to a few of them. And, the stories that people have about the pandemic motion where, they had an outsourced partner somewhere else in the world that dropped off the map. None of those people had, they were ordered to shelter, but none of them had connectivity. They ate lunch in the office every day and their food was taken away. All of these things that happened that, were catastrophic and required actual, reactive, agile business operations. What we see in the research is the champions have been able to cope with that, continue to grow their businesses and respond. And that's, metrics, planning, top-down care. And I think the thing that defines a lot of the, to me anyway, a lot of the digital businesses that have disrupted markets in the last 10 or 20 years is that many of them just put the customer, they have an obsessive customer viewpoint about the products and experiences that they're building, right? They see their own growth initially as an insurgency, right? And insurgency wars are fought with hearts and minds, and they drive around hearts and minds of users, which means the CX experience, the customer experience, both in product and in service and in sales, have to sit at the center, and the user has to be in control of that journey. And it's tough sometimes as organizations get bigger, as we deal with internal bureaucracy and internal politics. It's tough to keep the empathy, right? It's tough to keep the focus, because there are, you don't want to create technical debt in an organization. You don't want to create organizational debt in the CX team. It will catch up with you, and it can slow down and hamper your agility. But at the same time, it is incredibly important, if you're going to drive growth, drive customer spending, gain market share, things that in our survey we see champions doing again and again and again and consistently through the pandemic, then you need a bias for action, you need a plan, you need top-down commitment, and you need to be putting CX on a significantly high level as a company priority. You need to see it as an existential problem for the company.
Yeah. And so I think the thing I would like to do, if it can, is like it's almost like you'll get this reference. I want to remember watching Top of the Pops back in the day, and kind of when you were watching Top of the Pops, there was kind of like the new entrants to the chart, and then there was the kind of the big movers. as it were.
The breakers.
The breakers, there you go. The breaker, the top 10 breakers, the top 20 breakers. And that's the thing I probably wanted to kind of visit a little bit and say, can you give me a couple of examples of firms that you've seen on the move? That's the way, kind of like, as it were, up the maturity curve, and what they've done to achieve that. Because I guess what that does, it kind of sows the seed of possibility, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's a bunch of customers that we can think about that where what I've loved in particular is the adaptability, right? Where they've had a response. I think the health and wellness company Holland and Barrett in the UK, for example, I think they're I'm not entirely sure of UK COVID-19 restrictions and how they've changed. I do get a readout from my parents, but it's tough to decipher. Let's just put it that way. But I think mall stores closed, but high street stores were open. There is essential business. And I think they did what a lot of retailers did, right? Which is like, oh, we need to service and sell and connect with our customers. And we have this workforce, which is no longer able to work in these stores. And so they needed to digitize and connect and train those customers, right? And for me, that's all about all the things that we think are great about Champions, and at Zendesk, we think are great about the way that customer service should happen, right? You should be connecting directly and messaging. It should be easy to do, right? You don't need a 4,000-page ring binder of standard operating procedure to talk to a customer. There's been this move in retail in general of clienteling, of device enabling the retail store staff to be able to develop relationships with customers and message them. And I think, again, change comes slowly and then all at once. Like the pandemic accelerated this move to the empowerment of people, and Holland and Barrett did that, using the Zendesk suite, did that really well. MailChimp is an organization. I don't know if you're familiar with MailChimp. Just, enormous, fast growing, ubiquitous company in terms of the way that they handle mail for everyone, right? And they're one of the 50% of champions that are viewing their metrics every day, right? They analyze 30,000 tickets a month in Zendesk to stay on top of CSAT replies, feed it back into product, do all of these things that really kind of work. We've all been locked inside. And one of the things that some people have been doing, naming no names, but possibly me, is gaming a little more. And Discord, actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Discord.
I've heard of it, yeah. Not a big gamer, but I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost a generational test. It's sort of the default communication platform. It's like Zoom for my kids. It's the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. I mean, I kind of like, I think the last kind of like game I played was an arcade game, and it was probably sort of it might be Space Invaders and things. I've just never really done the whole gaming thing.
Oh, really? I have a copy of the like 80s game Scramble, the actual original arcade machine in my office. I don't ever visit my office anymore because it's shut, but so I believe that it is still there. But Discord, which is this, they connect.
Yeah.
They're a social platform for connecting gamers.
Yeah.
They had a huge spike in traffic, as many people in the sort of gaming entertainment industry did. And they deployed another of the tactics that champions deploy, right? What you do when you have an 100% increase in contacts is you need to automate some of that, right? And so they increased their ability to answer with a bot, in their case, the Zendesk Answer Bot tickets, by about 300%. And saw tons and tons of, inquiries move onto messaging platforms, which are becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
Sitting in California as I am, I do communicate with, my European contacts and, the Asian colleagues and friends over WhatsApp.
You're right.
But then in the US, that's just not a thing. Like people still, SMS is a thing. Maybe some people use Facebook Messenger.
Sure.
Hundreds of millions of users or whatever. There's a geographical change, but the shift towards conversational business and conversational messaging, I think when we see it and when we experience it, we really feel it.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, this is super convenient. Again, changes, there's geographic constraints on that. Not everyone wants to do that. There's preferences in countries, but at the same time, it is so efficient to have that continuous long running conversation of message.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing, we saw basically triple digit percentage increases in the number of our customers that were communicating over messaging after the pandemic started.
Yeah.
And it's a shift that isn't going away. One of those companies. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Like one more. Let's do one more.
Okay. Yeah, one of those companies was Valeria, the Spanish transportation company.
Okay.
And so their ticket volume increased 500%. So the support team was handling annual ticket volumes on a monthly cadence, right? Just think about how that must be. Especially you were all flipped remote, it's sort of disjointed. There is a sense of community that can be built digitally and remotely, I think, but to a certain extent, what support teams have really lacked or really had to learn to do really quickly is record the tribal knowledge that went on in in-person interactions, right? And make sure that the tools you have were capturing that. The other thing that they had to do was basically leverage WhatsApp to start proactively sending boarding passes and offering support to customers. And they implemented chat over in 2 days and added WhatsApp to their Zendesk instance and enabled Answer Bot, and just basically revamped their agent knowledge and their user-facing knowledge in a moment, because the business just transitioned extraordinarily fast.
So what I guess that's the basic highlight is this: what's possible, and what we find what we've discovered is possible over the last kind of few months. And I guess I was speaking to somebody else the other day. I was speaking to this gentleman by the name of Olaf Scheibergson, who's the CXO at Fjord, which is part of Accenture Interactive. And he was he was talking about this idea that while the effects of the pandemic might recede, the level of disruption and both technologically and just commercially, but also from an economic perspective, and some of the societal kind of disruptions, that's probably set to continue for some time. And I guess it's like it feels like we've got to kind of adjust that we're running at a slightly different or a much higher speed kind of right now, and we just got to make sure that we don't lose kind of the momentum.
Yeah, I think it could be that the era of looking at customer experience as a cost center is ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's either the end or the end of the beginning. I'm not sure. And I think we're moving, different values are taking over, right? Like customers expect transparency, responsiveness, trust from the organizations that they deal with. The internet has trained us, like lab rats, to search effectively for the things that we want, to look for self-service, to message with people. And it's also trained us because we have tended to seek out brands that treat us well and give great service. It's taught us to have much higher expectations of the businesses and organizations that we deal with, as citizens and as consumers.
Yes.
And you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
No, absolutely. So is that the I mean, do you think that's the one of the biggest kind of like messages from the research, is that actually the genie's out? There are some kind of champions here, but they are marching on. And is there a threat that if people don't grasp their own nettle, as it were, that they're going to get the gap is going to widen between the champions and the risers and increasingly the starters, as it were, and that's going to have competitive and commercial consequences?
Yeah, I hope there are two key connected messages that we see in the research, right? The one is we quantified that businesses that are CX champions are growing faster, they have higher CSAT, and they have, their spend per customer has grown as a result of their investment in customer experience, right? A, it works. B, there are, we tried to codify the things that you would need to do, the steps that you would need to go through in any organization, civilian, military, commercial, governmental. Like, what are the things that you would need to do if you wanted to alter the stance and position and posture that you take on customer experience and methodically attack it and do it. And I think it is nice to see those things written down. It's nice to understand that simple investments, a plan and a commitment will take you to where you want to go, right? This isn't, there is no magic sauce in building great CX experiences to a certain extent. Like, you don't have to have brand creative geniuses doing it for you.
No.
It's a lot more like, making a plan and following through with it. It's a lot more like sticking to a diet to lose weight, or, getting up in the morning, even if it's snowing, and running every day.
Yeah.
Kind of sucks, but the output, you like the outcome.
Yeah. And so is that, do you think that's the kind of the, I mean, I'm thinking about if you're switching gears a little bit, I mean, sort of look forward. I mean, is that the big challenge is almost like, make the decision, kind of like commit to it, and then take the action, and then just keep going? Because I guess it feels to me that at the very, very core of this, this is not just like a fad. It's like it requires discipline, which is going to require, sometimes you just have to do the dirty work, right? We just, that's just part of it. Part of being great is actually being able to put the hours in. If you kind of analogous to, greatness and on a, like, say, an athletic kind of like field, the greatness is built on like work, and a lot of it.
Yeah. I'm not the best coach, but what I say to my employees is it's called work, and that's what the money's for. And I think, it is that, right? It's like, but also it's, being better at making your customers happy, raising your CSAT, having them feel better about your brand, and invest more in that brand, connect more with that brand. Those are, there's a really joyful feedback loop there. It's good for the business. It's good for you. The era of, there are businesses that decide to be, that are running on fumes and extracting profit or rent seeking in different ways, that decide not to have great customer service. And that is a perfectly reasonable commercial choice.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to denigrate it, but most businesses, especially businesses that are geared for growth, and growth in the top line and growth in customers, I think there is a recognition that comes with a greater level of transparency with your users, being responsive to them and their needs, getting back to them. It's okay if the answer is no, just tell them quickly, and establishing a bond of trust with them that you can carry forward. That comes from making the right investments, having the right people, empowering those people, training those people, having the right tools in place, and having the right mindset as an organization that CSAT, NPS, the core measures of what you're trying to do, how quickly you get back to people, are important to you, because they will drive growth in your business. They will expand your TAM. They will expand your word of mouth, and they will expand the number of customers ultimately you have, and the amount of money or time that they spend with you.
Perfect. And so if I was to say to you, I mean, I always like to do this, Adrian, is that say that, we've talked about kind of quite a lot of stuff there, but I also kind of know that kind of when we talk about some of this sort of stuff, it's like some people can get kind of overwhelmed by it all, because it feels like, wow, that's a lot to take on, and want to know in a really kind of Confucius way what the first step kind of is of the 1,000-mile trek. So if I was to ask you kind of like, so there are people that are listening in, reading the highlights, and they want to improve the service and experience they deliver to their customers. I mean, what would be your best advice regarding, you should take this first step, you should do this, just do more of it, get better at it, or whatever? What would you say?
Yeah, like customer service is like building a forest or planting a tree, right? The best time to improve your customer service is last year. The second best time is today.
Right.
What would you do today? Well, first thing, self-serving notion is you need to look at the resources you're applying to the problem. Do you have the right, tools, the right and enough of the right people, and you have the right priorities, right? And I think that if the answer to any of those questions is no, then you need to go back and change it and say, get an agreement that it is an important thing to do. Make sure that you have the right tool in place. Make sure you have the right mindset. And then, take the most important customer journey that you care about and begin to make that journey better, right?
Yeah.
That journey could be the return experience. That journey could be the onboarding experience. That journey could be, how do you talk? How is it customers reach out to you? Are you making them dial you on the phone? That might be the right thing to do in your country, in your situation, given confidentiality. There's all these reasons why that's the right thing to do. But if it isn't, change it.
Sure.
It's not very difficult. You can, all of these companies that we talked to, some of the ones I mentioned, they flipped the daily working habits of a bunch of their employees. They flipped the communication channel that they used with the majority of their users. The pandemic made them do that. But there's no reason that, your resolve, your goals can't make you make a bold decision like that. And if you have the right tools in place and you don't worry too much about, a series of bespoke modifications, I'm a huge believer in convention over configuration in software and tools and process in general. Like the 80% solution that you can deploy today is better than the 100% solution you will deploy next year, 100% of the time.
Yeah, without a doubt, because it's all about momentum, right? And so, thank you for that, Adrian. I mean, that's fantastic advice. And so, just to sort of wrap up a little bit, I mean, I been asking kind of people on the back of kind of like writing this book, you alluded to it before, this is Punk CX kind of book, and it's the name of the podcast as well. I wrote it last year, and it's just it's advocating for a lot of the things that you've been describing kind of here, but in a very colorful and punchy and slightly profane way in parts. But when I've been speaking to people, I've been asking them a couple of like association kind of questions, just a little bit of fun to end all these interviews. And so the first question I wanted to ask was like, what one word would you, or not one or two words, would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
I would use a not very punk word to describe a punk approach to customer experience. I would use the word unencumbered, right?
Unencumbered.
I feel like classical business approaches of digital transformation and long-term planning are encumbered by baggage, unnecessary process, organizational rituals and dances that people need to go through. And they don't often have a heightened sense of practicality. You're carrying all these teams along and all these people along. So I would say that the punk approach to CX is unencumbered by what went before or what needs to happen, and is only laser focused on what the customer needs and what the outcome is you're looking for the business.
Perfect. I mean, and I don't know why kind of you talk about unencumbered, and it made me think about sort of education, and particularly like sort of around business education. And it still surprises me that if you look at kind of most of the the top business schools around the world and the MBA programs, the thing I look at some of their syllabuses and the curriculums, and what always fascinates me is how things like customer service and things like sales are not on the curriculum.
Yeah.
Fascinating, right?
They appear in the income statement. You know what I mean? Like, how do you read a balance sheet? How do you read an income statement? Well, here's the cost of goods sold. Yeah, I think that's changing. I do think that's changing a little bit. I think that there are modern approaches, and I think certainly the classroom dialogue style of MBA is all about covering the whole thing. But at the same time, I think there isn't a focus on analyzing. I shouldn't say that because I haven't done an MBA ever or recently. But the focus on analyzing great customer outcome and that importance, I think it is generally under researched. and underthought about. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, no, just I just thought that was a bit of a an aside. But anyway, back to my second question, which is what company or brand would you use? Would you kind of like call out that you think epitomizes that more sort of punk approach to customer experience?
Um, I not to be self-serving, but I'm going to tell you why I think Zendesk epitomizes that approach, and it touches on some of the points that I've mentioned, right? Which are my personal beliefs to a certain extent, but also company beliefs, right? Which is, I think the the practicality of just implementing a product that works out of the box as quickly as possible, getting going, talking to your customers and learning from them, like the do-it-yourself ethos and philosophy,
Yeah,
the unencumbered philosophy and the transparent philosophy, is for me what I project onto the phrase punk CX. Punk CX for me is I'm not going to worry about tradition. I'm not going to worry about ritual. I'm not going to be too concerned with worshiping what came before, right? There are no Emerson, Lake and Palmer organ solos,
PhDs in music
in
and
this
all that sort of stuff,
right? No 20-minute drum solos here. It's like bang it out, write the FAQ, put the messaging chat, put the chat box up there, right? Post the phone number. We don't know how to take phone calls. Doesn't matter. We don't know how to do chat. You'll learn.
Yeah.
It's okay, right? Offering service to your customers and learning as you go isn't the worst thing in the world. And we have seen the world pivot and do that recently, and to a certain extent prove out my hypothesis, right? When the world changed, everyone adapted, and they did it in very much a DIY, scrappy punk way. And I think that was tremendous.
No, I think it's absolutely right. I remember a friend of mine kind of sending me an email. I think it was back in April, even towards the end of April. So we hadn't been into it for too long. And he wrote, and he says, like, it's amazing to see how much punk CX is going on right now. Things getting bootstrapped in days and weeks rather than months and years. And so that's cool. I really like that. And I mean, if I perhaps I could maybe kind of just paraphrase what you've said, all right, and it seems to me that it's a bit like making the choice to get shit done, or shit that matters done, and get and done quickly.
Yeah.
And it's that it's more about kind of changing the lens of what matters.
Yeah. I think you reach a certain size as an organization where all the smart people in your company, you could ask, anyone can build a spreadsheet to prove anything. But then there's another day where you should just do it, go with your gut, talk to someone, figure out what they want, talk to one of your customers, figure out what they want, do it.
Yeah, completely.
Acknowledge the fear, do it anyway.
Well, indeed. Absolutely right. So Adrian, that's all I have kind of right now. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing the research for us. We'll make sure we get that all linked up in the highlights and things that we do right up. But if people want to find it, where should they? Where's the quickest and easiest way to kind of find it? So they just search for what it means to be a customer service and support champion and Zendesk, and
or search for Zendesk ESG research.
Perfect. And we'll find out there, but we'll make sure we get it all linked up and point people to that from the highlights. But I just want to say finally, thank you for sharing the research for us. Thank you for sharing your time and your insights and your experience with us. That's been awesome.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Adrian. And always a pleasure to talk to a fellow Adrian. Now my dog's barking.
Thank you. Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.